Winston Groom, author of Forrest Gump, says that Bill Boggs and his friend Spike the Wonder Dog unleash comedic wizardry in this madcap, highly entertaining satiric novel. Spike is the newest canine literary hero to take on the world with hilarious results.
We're here now with Gore Vidal and Roy Cohn. Look, they're friendly. They're sitting next to each other. They look like chums. There's been no conflict so far. I'd like to show you that Roy Cohn has miraculously come out with a book, he must type very quickly, called McCarthy, The Answer to Tail Gunner Joe, which was the NBC program. It was on when?
The program was on February 6th.
And the book is out now, and this is your answer to the book. What are you trying to do in this book in the broadest sense?
Well, I suppose 15, 20, 25 million people, Bill, saw this NBC film on the McCarthy period and on Senator McCarthy. The film was a lying, biased product. What I'm trying to do in this book...
Specifically, what were some of the lies?
Well, quickly, I say it opened with a lie and it closed with a lie. It said that his war record was a complete phony and all he did was shoot coconuts in the South Pacific. I quote in this book the citation issued to him by Commander of the Fleet Chester Nimitz, by General Harris of the Marine Corps, attesting to the fact he had a fantastic war record. When he went in the service, he was exempt. He gave up his judgeship and volunteered, went in and had a great war record, and they smear it all over the place. The end of it shows him in an alcoholic ward trying to beat up the attendants. I got the producer, Mr. Eckstein, on a program finally, and I asked him what the basis for this was. I suggested it was pure fiction. He said, well, an investigator whose name he didn't know had spoken to some person who had been around the hospital in 1957. He didn't know who the person was, and that was the basis in which he palmed this off against on 20 million American people. Now, I thought that deserved an answer.
Okay, Roy, one thing, I want to establish your relationship with Joe McCarthy. You were the attorney. You were the guy who was behind him pushing, right? I was
the chief counsel for the Senate Investigating Committee during the period of time he was the chairman. I was, in effect, his counsel.
You know, I've had people come up to me, stop me on the street, alive strangers, who said, why do you have Roy Cohn on your television show? That man ruined people's lives. What are you trying to do with Roy Cohn? Now here, and I think a lot of people feel that way, in this book, you're pictured shaking hands with Joe McCarthy. Why are you the one man who's standing up, still defending him, when most people feel many lives were ruined during that period?
Well, I know I wouldn't say most people, Bill. You know, when you get, and I don't know what Mr. Vidal's experience has been, but when you get out of New York and when you get out of Washington, you get a totally different perspective. Because when you get into middle America, I don't think you have quite the feeling you have some places around here. You've got an intense dislike for communism and what it stands for, and you have a good deal of admiration for Senator McCarthy as a man who had the guts and the courage to stand up to this, to expose it, and to take the punishment that goes with that.
What's your reaction to that, Gore? Well, the man who had the guts and the courage.
To stand up to communism, well, it was my impression that he was sort of a rogue senator who might just as easily have wanted to conquer Panama. I mean, you know, they look for issues, these people. Communism was not a very serious issue then internally. It never has been in the United States, but it's something that you can get people overexcited. And I don't think that his contribution ever had any affirmative side. And I think the negative, the very fact that an adjective has been coined, McCarthyism, which means that you make a reckless and malicious charge against somebody which you then cannot substantiate, this is going into the language. And I think that if he represents anything, it is a cautionary tale. I'm surprised that somebody as really intelligent as Mr. Cohn would at this late date want to make the case for him. I mean, it's a hard thing to do, and is it that you fear communism now and therefore think that you should revive his memory?
Well, I think I didn't revive his memory. His memory was revived by this NBC so-called documentary that came out, Tail Gunner Joe, that came out for 3 hours, made by Universal Films. That's what revived this whole thing. I didn't like it then because it was such a vicious picture, but I do like it now. Now, Mr. Vidal puts his finger on the whole point, and this is where our basic disagreement is. I do not pass over the communist threat as lightly as he does. He says it has never been a threat inside the United States. I would dispute that to start with, because when you had the atom bomb secrets stolen from inside the United States at Los Alamos by the Rosenberg Ring and by Dr. Klaus Fuchs, the head of the British mission, that to me is serious. It's not numbers, it's what they do. Mr. Vidal might as well tell me there are only 30 or 40,000 communists in Russia at the time they successfully overthrew the Kerensky government, and that would be correct. So it's not a numbers game. But let's forget that for a minute.
Well, no, I don't want to forget that. We'll pick that up right now.
All right.
You're talking about spy rings. Espionage exists inside the United States. The Soviets are spying on us. We are spying on them. The secrets of the atom bomb were in what is that magazine, Mechanical something or other?
Popular Mechanics.
Popular Mechanics actually had drawings of it before Mr. Fuchs transported certain plans to the enemy. We're all against espionage. There was never any question of that. McCarthy was out to smear other politicians, like Senator Scott Lucas, like Senator Millard Tydings. He was out to associate them with communists. And there was nothing he wouldn't do to smear them across the country to create this atmosphere of fear, which came out of, curiously enough, not McCarthy himself. He was just a pal riding along. It came out of Harry Truman. It came out of the Cold War. In order to get these huge military appropriations, Harry Truman deliberately decided, with the rulers of the country, that the Congress would not appropriate money for the holy war against communism unless they were frightened. Communists are everywhere. They're under the bed. They're in the local school board. They're all over. They're going to take over. Harry Truman began all this. Then John Foster Dulles, with his Holy Crusade, aggravated it. And then McCarthy just drifted into the thing and had a wonderful time. But in point of fact, there was never any internal menace. There wasn't much external menace. Between 1945 and 1950, we had exclusive possession of the atomic bomb.
All right, let's
Okay,
hear it.
all right. Well, now I think this is a very important point. I don't see how Mr. Vidal in the year 1977 can tell an audience in this city or in this country that communism did not, or say does not, constitute any real kind of an external menace. 1/3 of the world lives under communist slavery, behind the Iron Curtain. That means hundreds of millions of people don't have the right to argue as we're doing here today. Read one newspaper, censored in advance. Have one radio station, one television station, have the right to belief in God wiped out cold, everything which makes people tick, gone. And to say, and a system which is dedicated to the destruction of freedom throughout the world. We've seen what it's done in Cuba. We've seen what it did to Czechoslovakia when Dubček rose up. Hungary, Angola in the last year. And to blithely sit around and say, oh, it's just one of those things, which it's one of those little things that some senator came along and made an issue out of it, seems to me, I would say that's not worthy of the intelligence which Mr. Vidal certainly has.
Or we'll take a break and we'll come right back with you. I wish we didn't have to. Commercial. Run the film fast. Right back in. Gore Vidal.
Well, I just wanted to pick up what Mr. Cohn was saying, that he made the familiar speech about how dreadful life is in communist countries. I think by and large that is true. I would question, I think the Cubans are better off under their present government than they were under that.
You say they are?
Batista, yeah, I would think so. The average person has a better life than he did before. When the mob was in there in the casinos, and it was a great rip-off place, a sort of whorehouse for the United States. It is no longer that. But in any case, I've never thought that Senator McCarthy ever had anything to do with external communism. There's nothing you could do about it. We were never given a mandate to regulate the internal affairs of any other country. This mandate was never given us by God or even by Congress. So therefore, any attempt made to suddenly say, well, these are awful governments. Of course they're awful governments. Some of them are, some of them aren't. So what? What we're talking about is smearing other Americans, preferably members of the Democratic Party, and trying to pretend that they are communists when indeed they are not.
Well, that touches me.
This country is about divided about evenly between conservatives and reactionaries. I mean, the idea that there's any far left of this country is madness.
Fortunately, that's one of the good signs of the common sense of the American people, and I agree with you. The country is basically conservative today. By the way, I'm a Democrat, so I don't think McCarthy hired me as chief counsel, so I don't...
Who promoted Major Peretz?
A system promoted Major Peretz.
That was my favorite non-issue.
Yeah, you see, the big issue, the big failing, I think, in Mr. Vidal's logic in this whole thing is he draws this distinction between external communism, internal communism, when it's all the same thing. The communists inside in the United States don't amount to anything without the support of an international movement. And how Mr. Vidal still, at this time, can think that there isn't this threat from this movement, which I'm sure he's very much against.
Instead of talk,
I find, but
no threat at all.
he says, Bill, before you leave the subject, Mr. Vidal is apparently under the impression that Senator McCarthy would just set out in a campaign to smear senators he didn't like Tidings. But it was the other way around. Tidings is the man. McCarthy never bothered and went near him. Tidings said, after the McCarthy charges originally came out, give me McCarthy for 1 day and he'll never show his face in the Senate again. McCarthy won. Tidings was beaten by the people of his home state.
I want to move into the area of the techniques, the tactics that were used by McCarthy and by you.
Methods.
The methods, tactics, techniques, whatever you want to say.
I like McCarthy, but I don't like his methods.
Not his methods.
Right,
okay, fine. What about the lives that were really ruined and messed up?
Okay, but,
the guy like Zero Mostel, the artists, the people who were blacklisted, who had to go underground.
I know. I find the most articulate people around today, those coining the most money in our decadent capitalistic country, are the Zero Mostels and all of these people who were supposedly wiped out by the McCarthy period. Now, wait a minute.
Just go back to the period
Bill,
of what it was like for them at that time, not now, several years later.
Bill, I just don't buy this whole thing. Because, first of all, let me tell you 3 basic mistakes. It was not McCarthy who investigated Hollywood. That was a totally different committee about which Mr. Vidal has written. So long ago he probably doesn't remember it, but I've read it, and he did write about it.
I have a good memory.
The House Committee on Un-American Activities. But if you talk to anybody, Bill, they'll tell you McCarthy did this to Zero Mostel, not that I'm saying something shouldn't have been done to Zero Mostel, so on and so forth. But the fact is it was not the McCarthy Committee which did it.
Are you accusing...
I think that is something a public is entitled to know, and I don't think we're supposed to pin medals on people any more than we would pin medals on people who supported Hitler or Nazi causes. I don't see the difference between Nazism and Hitler on the one hand and communism on the other hand. I think they're both bad, and I don't like this double standard where we make heroes out of people who have been exposed for support of communist causes.
Mr. Vidal,
well, maybe there was a point in making heroes out of the victims of a reckless, gallivanting intriguer. I will say that the one I want to ask you about this, to me, the nicest thing, let's be affirmative, the nicest thing that I have ever heard about Joe McCarthy was told me by Senator Flanders of Vermont that he was a full-time homosexual. Is this true?
No, I'm sure you'd think that merited a badge of honor, but it is not true.
Well, I'm getting to you in a minute, but
well,
I mean,
sure.
What about Senator McCarthy?
Sure, I mean, that's your favorite topic of conversation. I know that.
I know. It's
by the way,
aroused by the obvious.
I know. Just let me tell you what arouses the obvious in Mr. Vidal. I was looking at one of his recent writings somebody gave to me this morning, and here are some of his, very quickly, here are some of his views. President Lyndon Johnson was certifiably mad and a genuine psycho. President Carter is corrupt and fits the bill for a perfect dictator, which he'll probably become.
You're skipping. Go on.
General MacArthur was a pompous... These are some of the lovely little things which Mr. Vidal just loves to throw around about people. And if he thinks I'm going to get into that game with him here today, it's a very good example of McCarthyism, the things he says about people.
So at least you admit there is something called McCarthyism.
Oh, of course there is. The Daily Worker coined the phrase McCarthyism. And what McCarthyism is what this Tail Gunner Joe movie did, and it's things like you've been saying on this program today. Of course there's such a thing as McCarthyism. We have a living exponent of it right here.
Well, since you now agree with our premise that to be a reckless and malicious disregarder of the truth in what you say is indeed McCarthyism, if you agree that that term exists and therefore the eponymous or the original founder of the term...
I'm glad you explained that word. I was going to call up Bill Buckley.
I know. You would have got through to him very quickly.
I hope so.
But, so, in other words, the fact of this reckless bad man, you agreed to... I'm kind of curious, watching you do the McCarthy tactic, reading out of context some things that I said, which are not exactly correct, but the spirit is right. Lyndon Johnson was indeed pretty mad part of the time. Toward the end of his regime, he kept saying that his feet were growing. And he was having he had some boots made, and he had blamed the guy who was making the boots. He said, my feet are growing, and he thought there was something in the water. Fluorine, probably, the right wing had put in there. I would say, I made a joke about Carter. I said that if we ever have a dictator, it'll be somebody warm and folksy like Carter, like Arthur Godfrey. Douglas MacArthur, whom I probably knew a bit better than you, since I was born at West Point when he was commandant, and so I most of my life, was indeed about as pompous an ass as you could ever see on this scene.
Well, you have
so I think all of this is pretty much fair comment.
You have a wonderful way of just tearing everybody apart, and then you
obvious.
Then you sit here and you start talking about what Senator McCarthy being embarked upon a career of saying unkind things or trying to destroy distinguished public servants when you've done a hatchet job, the like of which Senator McCarthy never could have attempted.
What nonsense. I never did it in the form of a Senate committee, and I never called witnesses, and I never went round the law to have
I realize
your friend Mr. Shine brought back from the Army and
Gentlemen,
special
we'll take
favors
a break.
done.
We'll be right back. You can keep talking, but you got to have a commercial. Gore, why did you raise the question of Joe McCarthy's homosexuality?
Well, it was much discussed, and I had a long talk with Senator Flanders. By the way, anybody who wants to know about Joe McCarthy, don't bother Mr. Cohn's book, though I'm sure it's brilliantly written and well argued. But read Richard H. Rovere, R-O-V-E-R-E, on the subject of Joe McCarthy. It is the best study so far.
But again,
if you're going to start plugging rivals, I'm going to start plugging Bill Buckley's new book, Airborne.
Airborne?
Good.
Well, let's get back to my question. I was really curious because I was watching this morning with Stanley when he was trying to get into your personal habits, and I was curious as to why you raised the question. Is that the essence of this story in your mind, of homosexuality?
Well, no, I said the most attractive thing I'd ever heard about him was that.
Well,
I regarded this as a plus, and I wondered, and Senator Flanders thought of it as a minus.
Right.
And he had some arrangement with that Las Vegas Greenblatt, what's his name? Greenspan, who was supposed to have had the evidence on it in his safe.
Right. Well,
that famous safe was
Gore, as you probably know, Senator Flanders apologized for what he had said, which probably destroys Senator Flanders' credibility in your eyes. And I hate to eliminate or eradicate the one plus you ever did give to Senator McCarthy, but the statement and the charge is totally untrue.
You would know.
So that's it. Well, I don't know. You've been around the man for a certain period of time. You know his wife. You know his family. You see him, I suppose you can know as well as anybody can know. And if I knew or didn't know, I'd want to have a little more proof before I start throwing it around the way you've done.
That Senator Flanders did.
Well, that's McCarthy. Senator Flanders apologized for having made a statement which was not based on fact, but based on something somebody told him, which when he checked it out, felt was so unfounded that Senator McCarthy deserved and received an apology from Senator Flanders.
I would be happy to see that.
It's probably, I'll be delighted.
You got a copy of it with you?
It's in my book.
Roy, do you have any regrets for what you did?
Well, let me, when you use
personal regrets that you wished you hadn't done and say what you did.
Right, I understand that. Okay, what I did, all right, now this is my day of confession of high crimes and treasons. As far as the McCarthy period is concerned, let me say this to you. I don't think you can go 20 years later and live. I've been a defendant, a successful, unfortunately, in 3 criminal trials, and you learn things, and you do change your perspective. And I'm not conceited enough to say that I'm as sure of everything now as I was 20 years ago. Of course not. But I believe in the basic issue. That's why I've made this fight in answer to this picture now.
What specifically might you regret? If you were to say, well, specifically, this is what I've learned.
All right, okay, tell you what I learned. The regrets I have, and people never seem to ask me about it, were more during the days when I was a prosecutor than the days I was counsel for the McCarthy Committee. I don't like conspiracy trials. I don't like rubber-stamped grand juries today, and those were devices which I used, as did all prosecutors in those days, and I do regret those things. Insofar as the basic issue that Senator McCarthy stood for, I do believe that communism was a threat then. I believe it's an enormous threat today, and I think he did a courageous job in trying to expose it. And when a 3-hour film, which the young people get as practically their only source of what happened during a period they didn't live through, comes out with a pack of lies and passes itself off as a documentary, somebody's got to attempt an answer, and that's what I'm trying to do.
You're asking for equal time somehow?
I have asked for equal time.
And what would equal time constitute?
Well, that's quite a question. I wouldn't want to inflict 3 hours more on the American public, but I suppose equal time would get into something.
Did you see the show in question, Gore?
No, and I must say I have a sense on this program slightly of being had I read in the paper that I am to have a great debate with Mr. Cohn here. I didn't even know he was going to be on the program.
I didn't know you were
saw
going to be
this,
on either. I'm sure we're both pleasantly surprised.
Well, that's our illusion that we create.
Yeah. And so I have not seen the program about Tail Gunner Joe. I haven't thought much about McCarthy in many, many years, nor I haven't thought very much about Mr. Cohn either.
Well, I'm glad I'm so much more current on Mr. Vidal.
Well, you are current, maybe an exaggeration, but you are certainly here today. So I was not able to prepare, and since Mr. Cohn is one of the greatest living defenders not only of Joe McCarthy, but of Roy Cohn, in and out of court, I am considerably at a disadvantage since I have come unprepared. So I'm not able really to counter him on any of these things, except occasionally something flickers through my memory.
Well, I think
so. This is the Roy Cohn hour.
Well, now, wow. I think Mr. Vidal has lapsed into an uncharacteristic modesty, and I don't think he should. He's very articulate, and I'm sure he's written extensively on this issue. As a matter of fact, I noticed in one of his articles that he himself used the term Tail Gunner Joe, which ended up as the title to the movie. So he probably made a little bit of history right there, and I think he's probably much more knowledgeable about this whole period as a student of history, as indeed he is, a man who can brand one president a psycho and the next one about to be a dictator, and General MacArthur a pompous whatever it is.
Here's a little McCarthyism going on right now.
He shouldn't disclaim, I mean, total inability to cope with any of these current topics. He does it with great
keep talking, Roy. Keep talking.
Great precision.
Keep talking. This is known as filler. You know, you throw your mud and then the filler goes on until they've forgotten what the point was. I never said that Carter was going to be a dictator. I said this was the style of one, and could be the style. As far as Lyndon Johnson being up the wall, many people noticed that about him. He was a manic depressive, if you want the exact phrase, and he was up and down and didn't make much sense a lot of the time. As the pomposity of Douglas MacArthur is a well-known fact for those of us who served in the Second World War. 3 years in the Army I spent in the Pacific, and we did not admire General MacArthur as much as you people on the outside.
Gore, excuse me, we'll take a break and we'll conclude right after this. I said to Gore Vidal as we were going to commercial, I'm sorry if you have a sense of being had. Not our intention to manipulate you on that level. So let's take the minute or two that we have left to get into a couple of things you've recently said. You said that if you were president, you would abolish the military academies and the CIA.
Yes, I would. I think that they're basically un-American. I think that the CIA, with its $8 billion unaccountable funding, is an outrageous outfit. It's spent a lot of time spying on Americans, killing other leaders, or trying to destabilizing, as well as just being a big inefficient boondoggle. We had something, you know, we were a very successful country for about 170 years, and then in the last 30 years we've been having a bad time of it. The CIA has only been with us the last 30 years, so I don't say there's any cause and effect. But they are a symbol of things that have gone wrong with us, and I think for spy work, military intelligence is what's supposed to do it.
I'd be curious if you were put in a position of defending the CIA.
I never thought I would be, but I am. One thing that goes through my mind, if the CIA were around, maybe we wouldn't have Amin in the world today. So that's enough to win the CIA over to me anyway. Bill, I didn't want to be evasive about one answer before about the demand for equal time. There's something else I intend to do with reference to NBC and Universal, which put out this film, but that's going to be revealed in People magazine next week, and I'm not talking about it until then. But we're going to make a full-scale fight out of this. I'd be interested in Mr. Vidal's reaction after he has gotten up to date on the movie and some of the answers in the book. I think he might feel that I was had, just as he was had when Caligula was misrepresented and a lot of things taken out of context, to the point that he's taken certain steps to prevent that. I have the same intensity of feeling about the destruction of a person and a period in American history, which destruction I think has been very unfairly attempted entailed on a joke.
Okay, in summary of your being here today, first, Gore, your PR people did know about the appearance today with Roy Cohn,
I
and
just knew he was going to be on a program a couple of days ago.
and they even
It's
switched
very
you
different
from
from
Wednesday
reading
to
that there's going to
Thursday.
be a debate on
well,
McCarthyism.
page 6 in the Post, they make everything into a fight. I mean, that's what happens. But I do appreciate you both coming.
I'm glad it went so smooth.
What are your reactions to each other, in summary, of your few minutes spent?
Well, if you overlook Mr. Vidal's McCarthyism, he's a very charming person.
Roy Cohn has managed to stay out of jail all these years, and I admire him for that, and I'd like to have him for my lawyer.
I will conclude on that point. We have a real special show for you tomorrow. Jack Hemingway is going to be here, and other treats. Lauren Hutton, oh, gee, I can hardly wait. I'll see you then at 1 o'clock, and thank you, gentlemen. Thanks for watching. Have a nice afternoon.
It can't get any.
New York Times best-selling author Mark Elliott exclaims, Bill Boggs has hit a home run with this highly original and hilarious satire on everything. A terrific read I highly recommend.